First off, let me preface this video by saying that this is not a perfect example of one of these machines. It has high hours, it has some wear and tear, and it's missing a few pieces. But it's what I've got, and I wanted to make a video to share some information about it. This is a Case 1845C rubber tired skid steer loader. Case made these from 1986 to the year 2000, I believe. They made a few changes along the way, which I'll mention as I get to them. These machines weigh approximately 6,200 pounds. They have a rated operating capacity of 1,750 pounds, and they have a tipping load of just over twice that at 3,550 pounds, I believe. These machines used Case 4-390 engines. They are a 4-cylinder, 3.9 liter, direct injected, naturally aspirated, diesel of course. They are identical in every way to a Cummins 4B. The only difference is the color of the paint, and where the Cummins engine gets a Cummins data plate, the Case engine gets a Case data plate. And that is the only difference. These engines were, in these machines, were rated at, I believe originally it was 57 horsepower, and it stayed right around there the whole time. I think they upped it to like somewhere around 65 at some point, but about 60 horsepower, give or take. You can see the radiator, and over here the hydraulic oil cooler mounted inside the door. Down here under the radiator you can see the gear pump for the boom, bucket, and auxiliary hydraulics. These pumps put out 16 gallons a minute, I believe. And in here you can see the cast iron piece that connects the pump, or holds the pump to the engine, and also acts as the rear engine mount. Just kind of neat how it's all integrated together like that. This right-hand pillar acts as the hydraulic fluid reservoir. You can see down here there's a sight glass to check the level. And the left-hand pillar acts as the diesel fuel tank. Here you can see the hydraulic oil filter and the fan down here. Belt tensioner, oil fill, engine oil fill I should say. Here you can see the injection pump. This is I believe it's called a Lucas CAV pump. I'm not sure if that's the correct name, but these were used on the majority of these machines. There were two other pumps that were used. One was I believe a Bosch Model A pump, which was an inline pump. It looks just like a P pump, if you're familiar with those. And the other was, I believe, a Bosch VE pump, which is another rotary pump. Those two other pumps were used on emission certified engines, and I'm not sure if that was a state thing or a year thing, or why exactly they were used, but that's what they were used on. Down here you can see the fuel lift pump. Right here, the fuel filters, primary and secondary. Right in between them is the fuel return line. There's the bell housing of the engine. Up here's the air cleaner. That's missing a cap right here, so it's exposed. On the other side of the engine here, you can see the starter and the engine oil filter, the alternator. These rear doors are actually a lot more fragile than they look. It's easy to damage them by backing into things or operating the machine with them open. Actually, I can see where someone has damaged this one and welded it back on. So that's a common thing. These bars above the boom are part of the mechanical self-leveling setup that the 1845Cs had. It works well. I've never heard of any significant problems with them. The booms themselves are very strong. I've never seen a broken boom on an 1845C. Although, when they get to higher hours, it is somewhat common to see these rear pivot points. I'm not sure exactly what happens to them. I guess they get worn out, or maybe they break off their welds or whatever, but I see a lot of repairs on those on really high hour machines like 7,000 hour plus. Here's the auxiliary hydraulic hookup point. It's missing a coupler though. Now, the most prominent change that Case made to these machines was, I believe in 94 or 95, they changed the color of the cab from brown to gray. Now, this is a gray cab machine. And along with that, they also changed the lap bar setup to where it's the roller coaster style that you see on a lot of machines. Previously, it was two separate bars that folded in from the sides, and in my opinion, that's not as good. But at this point, I'm going to slide the cab forward so that I can show you the rest of the drivetrain on the machine. Alright, I've got the cab slid forward on this machine. That was actually kind of a pain in the butt. You have to raise the boom up, remove the seat pan and the floor pan, then disconnect the drive control linkage, disconnect the boom and bucket linkage, the throttle control, the parking brake, and some wiring plugs, and then you can unbolt the cab and then slide it forward. But then you have to get another machine to pull it forward because the tracks that it slides in are all gummed up with crud. But anyway, now I can show you the rest of the drivetrain on these machines. The engine is coupled to the drive pump with actually a double cardan joint down here. There's actually two U-joints in it, but you can only see the one, and there's one further inside. And that's a very commonly neglected grease point, because this joint is hard enough to grease with the cab slid back, and the one inside is impossible to get to without taking this cover off. So it pretty much never gets greased on most machines. The drive pump is a Sauer Danfoss M46 tandem variable displacement axial piston hydrostatic pump. It has an integral charge pump, and these pumps are servo controlled, and that's what these housings on top are. So what actually happens when you move the control lever, you're moving these little levers on top, and those are connected to valves that control the flow of fluid into either side of these housings, and that fluid acts on a servo piston that slides back and forth, or side to side I should say, and those servo pistons they then act on the swash plates in the pump. So it's, in effect, it's just like having power steering but for your skid steer. The pumps are then connected to the drive motors. These use Sauer-Danfoss OMT orbital hydraulic motors for their drive motors. It is important to note that early 1845Cs, and I'm not sure which years when they changed, but on some very early machines they used a axial piston drive motor, and it was attached to the machine with a planetary gearbox in between the motor and the chain case where it mounts here. And you can't miss them. They're like a big round thing in between the motor and chain box. But those planetaries they're durable enough and they're reliable as long as you keep fresh, clean fluid in them. What can happen is, as they age, water gets in or dirt gets in, and that can cause a lot of damage. And some parts for the planetaries are still available from Case, and some are not. So if you have a setup like that, take the time to change the fluid and keep them healthy. As long as you keep good fluid in them, they're fine. Here's just some more shots of everything down in the pan. And there's some these hex head plugs right here with the holes cross drilled through them. There's one on this side and there's one over here. Those are the relief valves for the pump. So if you need to roll the machine, just unscrew those a couple of turns and then the machine will freewheel. These plastic, or I think they might be fiberglass, I'm not sure, but these chain case covers are another weak point. They crack and break and leak and allow water in. There's 4 of them, one on each corner, that allows you to work on the chains and the sprockets in there for each wheel. But they leak and allow water in, and that water can cause problems. It causes rust. In the winter it can freeze up and jam up your drive system. So a lot of people will glue these down with like RTV silicone. Really it's just better to park the machine under a shelter so it doesn't get rained on, and then you won't have problems anyway. Here you can see the auxiliary hydraulic control valve. It's mounted on the floor of the machine up front here, and it has this little linkage that goes up and connects to a foot pedal in the cab. The auxiliary hydraulics in these machines were done a little bit differently than most. Instead of just having 3 spools on the main loader control valve here, there's only 2, and then there is a line coming out of the back of it that goes down to another valve right here, and then this valve of course goes out the boom to the auxiliary hydraulic connections, and the return from this valve comes back up to the loader valve and tees into the return for the loader valve. And this port that feeds the secondary auxiliary control valve is called a power beyond port. And the system works fine, but people sometimes get into trouble when they want to remove the auxiliary hydraulics for whatever reason, and they just try to cap it off. And you can't do that, because if you just put a cap on it and block the flow, that tricks it into thinking that there's a load on it, and then it just sends all the flow, or tries to send all this flow through the auxiliaries all the time, and just jams it up. So you either have to, if you want to remove them, you have to run a hose from the power beyond port back to the return so it'll just flow freely, or you can, there's a plug you can take off that line and take a plug out and replace it with a different plug, and then everything will work fine and you just won't have auxiliaries. But so it's a little bit convoluted, but and I'm not sure why they did it like that, but it works. If you look down here in near the bottom of the chain cases, they're kind of hard to see even with the cab forward, but on each side, there's one on each side, you'll see these little rubber boots and these pieces sticking out and these cables, and this is the parking brake system on these machines. And all it is a steel pin that slides into the chain case and goes through a hole in a sprocket in there, just like sticking a stick through the spokes in a bicycle. And it works about as well as that does, actually. These are a constant source of problems on these machines. They freeze up in the winter, they get rusty, or dirt gets in there and they get jammed up, and then either the parking brake won't go on, or worse, it won't come off. And the way it's supposed to work is if you notice this linkage with this spring and the cable here. Oh, okay, yeah, see that's what happens a lot of times. The cable just breaks. But there's a linkage here, and when you put the lap bar down inside, you sit in the machine and put the lap bar down, it is supposed to pull this linkage up and retract the pins and allow the machine to move. But if you have an operator that isn't very conscientious and just tries to force the machine, you can do a lot of damage, break the pins, damage the sprocket. You can even damage the welded piece that the pin slides in. It was just really a bad design. It doesn't work well. Another very well-deserved criticism about these machines is how difficult the battery is to access. This is the battery tray. This one's all full of gunk. But when the cab is slid back over it, it sits down between here, and this space is too small to pull the battery out. So the only way to remove the battery is to slide the cab forward. But then of course if you have a dead battery, you probably can't start the machine to pick the boom up, so you can't slide the cab forward. So it's just terrible. And I've seen machines where people have cut holes in the fender and made a little access hatch, which is kind of a hack job. That kind of sucks, but that's definitely a major annoyance. So if you have one of these machines, make sure you put a good battery in it that you're not going to have to mess with for a long time, because they are difficult to remove and install. But I'm going to go ahead and slide the cab back and put everything back together, and then I'll show you the controls and operator station. Alright, I've got the cab slid back and everything put back together. So now let me climb inside and show you the instruments and controls. Let me put the lamp bar down. In the top right hand corner here we have the instrument panel, and there's a series of warning lights, one for low battery voltage, engine temperature, engine oil pressure, hydraulic filter restriction, air filter restriction, alternator output, I believe, hydraulic temperature, and a seatbelt warning light. Here we have the hour meter. This machine has 6,896 hours. This green LED lights up to let you know that everything is fine, system's normal. And then we have the fuel gauge, which is a series of LEDs that corresponds to the fuel level. We have the key switch right here. I believe you have run, which lights everything up, and then past that is start. I think on the other side is for preheat, but I'm not sure about that. I know these were available with ether injection systems, but I don't know if they ever had grid heaters available for these. I believe in these holes, again I'm not completely sure, but one should have been a switch for lights and the other should have been a button for ether injection. Down here on the lower right hand side we have the throttle lever. We have slow, fast. To control the actual movements of the machine, we have a lever on each side. The right hand control lever, pushing it forward causes the right side wheels to rotate forward, and pulling it back causes them to rotate backwards, of course. Tilting the right hand control lever away from you causes the bucket to curl away, to dump, and tilting it towards you causes the bucket to roll back. Same thing on the left side. Twisting the handle away from you causes the boom to raise, and twisting it towards you causes the boom to lower. If your machine was equipped with high flow auxiliary hydraulics, you would have a red push button in the center of the left hand handle here. The auxiliary hydraulics are controlled by a foot pedal on the floor here. You just rock it back and forth. It's not hooked up because it's missing a bolt, but that's how it works. But that's it for controls and instruments. Very simple, bare bones. The quick attach couplers was something that Case seemed to struggle with almost the entire time they made these machines. The early ones were called inline lever couplers because the levers rotated this way, not this way. Those couplers were pretty terrible. They were just too weak. They were bolted together, and they broke, they wore out, and it's not common to find them anymore. Then they went to the first style of side lever couplers, and those were better, but they were still bolted together and they still had issues. And then the third iteration is what this is, which is the second style of side lever coupler, and these were okay. As you can see, it has a very large cross member that is welded in. It's all welded together, fabricated. As you can see, one of these levers is still broken, so they weren't perfect, but they did work okay, especially if you didn't abuse them. But that's about all I can think of to show you on this machine. They're excellent skid steers. With proper care and maintenance, they will go to 10,000 hours and beyond. I'm not completely sure that they're really worth the prices that some people ask for them, if only because a lot of times for the price that people want for an 1845C, you can get a newer Case machine, like a 60XT or something comparable, and that's even better. But if you're thinking about buying one and you found one with a good price on it that you like, I'd say go for it, definitely. They are very well designed and well executed machines, and they deserve the reputation they get, in my opinion.